Erdtree faithful.
Hello everyone, welcome back to the Mana Plus Gaming channel. It's me again, your host and channel owner. In the previous video, I analyzed and shared my personal hypotheses about the character Messmer the Impaler, regarding his noble origins, his status as a mutation similar to Misbegotten or Omen, and his leadership in a cult-worshipping Omen and the Crucible, representing religious beliefs from a pre-age of the Erdtree era. I also discussed the mystery surrounding the fire he possesses, and the sin that led to his expulsion along with the Land of Shadow after the Unsun battle event. If you haven't watched that video yet, I'll leave the link in the description below. As I've discussed in previous videos, the mutations in the bodies of Misbegotten are likely due to direct contact they or their parents had with the Crucible. This could be because Misbegotten and their parents were either slaves, criminals, or socially marginalized individuals who underwent a punishment related to direct contact with the Crucible, resulting in their bodies becoming more aggressive and dangerous, with a decreased intelligence and possibly even memory loss. Alternatively, they may have willingly contacted the Crucible in an attempt to transform their bodies to become closer to the divine and the beliefs they worship. Whether voluntary or forced, those who come into contact with the Crucible are the beings most closely tied to it. The case of Misbegotten differs slightly from Omen. As we know, Omen also have a close connection with the Crucible, but the majority of Omen we encounter in the original game seem to have not had direct contact with the Crucible like Misbegotten. Instead, they carry a curse that causes their souls to be rejected by the Erdtree after death, with wraiths haunting them immediately upon resurrection. If you followed Dung Eater's questline, you'll understand this better. Essentially, Omen are vessels for the wraiths, vengeful spirits of those who died when cursed, as clearly noted in the item description of Wraith Calling Bell. This explains why most Omen can use the ghostly black and yellow fire. Furthermore, in theory, the Crucible is a convergence of different life forms, and wraiths are a form of life existing within Omen's bodies from birth, hence why Omen bear the horns or marks of the Crucible even without direct contact. Other examples include with red albinorics or sanguine nobles, and so on. In summary, Misbegotten mutate due to direct contact they or their parents had with the Crucible in material form, while the mutations in most Omen we encounter in the original game are caused by their indirect contact with the Crucible in a non-material form. As for the non-material aspect of the Crucible, we have a fairly good understanding. But what about the Crucible in material form? What could it be? Stay tuned to this video to hear my analysis and hypotheses about the Crucible in material form, which could play a pivotal role in the main storyline of the upcoming DLC. To delve deeper into the analysis of the Crucible in its material form, I believe it's best to start with the basics that we know from the original game. For those who aren't familiar with the symbols of the Crucible, the Omen, and the Erdtree, here they are. All three symbols share some common features. Firstly, at the center of each symbol is the representation of interlocking circles forming the Elden Ring. This is understandable because the Elden Ring is essentially a collection of laws that govern life, as we know it, and the Erdtree and the Crucible are believed to be fundamental to these laws of life and existence. Secondly, at the three corners of these symbols are similar patterns that I believe are inspired by the triquetra symbol, also known as the Trinity knot in Celtic culture, where its three arms symbolize birth, life, and death. Thirdly, they all exhibit patterns resembling roots of trees. Looking at the Erdtree symbol, we can clearly see signs of root-like patterns, but they seem to intertwine to form organized double helixes, which signify order. However, unlike the Erdtree, the other two symbols, the Crucible and the Omen, seem to lack signs of order as their root-like parts grow intertwined in a less organized manner, especially the Omen symbol, where its root patterns develop quite extreme. Therefore, in terms of sculptural complexity, the Erdtree symbol can be seen as perfectly organized, the Crucible symbol as organized, and finally, the Omen symbol representing disorganization, with the distinguishing factor being the root patterns of each. Indeed, the patterns or images of roots are abundant in the original game, and the majority of them are related to the Crucible, the Erdtree, or the Great Tree. Rarely do you encounter roots or root-like patterns of any other tree species except for the ones I just mentioned. As we know, the Erdtree has a massive root system that extends deep into the ground, as seen in deep root depths, which is considered the starting point of the great tree's root network spreading throughout the lands between. The root networks of the Erdtree are used to bring the souls of the dead back to the Erdtree for reincarnation. In a simplistic sense, the bodies and souls of the dead are nourishment for the Erdtree. This is also why most tombs are built at the locations of Erdtree's root branches. And naturally, the Erdtree's root system can be considered the source of life, providing life by granting the ability of reincarnation to the dead. Personally, I believe that the Crucible tree's root system in the DLC has similar capabilities. However, there is a special case, the Omen. The souls and bodies of the Omen are not accepted by the Erdtree because they are deemed impure. So, does this apply to the Crucible tree? I believe not. The roots of the Crucible tree will accept all bodies and souls of every creature because the essence of the Crucible is closely related to life, and the Crucible tree is also the primordial form of the Erdtree, as stated in the description of Siluria's tree item. Perhaps, to maintain a perfect order and pure faith, Erdtree and Queen Marika had to cast away things related to ancient beliefs, discard things considered impure, disorganized, and chaotic, typical of Omen or the Crucible Knights, victims of religious dissent. You can see the design of the roots of the Crucible tree or the primordial form of the Erdtree on quite a few items, such as the Siluria's tree spear I just mentioned, takes cameo talisman, and of course, in the shadow of the Erdtree trailer. It appears on a shield that the advertising friend uses to attack Messmer, a shield covered in the characteristic red color of the Crucible, similar to the color on the armor sets worn by the Crucible Knights. However, analyses of the roots or symbols of the Crucible may not explain why the bodies of Misbegotten mutate as a punishment, supposedly because they have had direct contact with the Crucible. Therefore, it's evident that the Crucible must exist in some purely physical form alongside religious beliefs or abstract concepts. The idea for this stems from a chance encounter where I saw an item in the cut content section of the original game. Here it is, an item whose name I don't know, and you probably won't either. In terms of design, it looks like a small, cheap vial, but if you look closely, you'll immediately notice the label on the vial is the Crucible symbol. What's more, the yellow liquid inside the vial seems to be slowly solidifying and settling, becoming something very similar to amber. In summary, the overall design of this small vial, containing yellow liquid, looks exactly like a piece of amber. So what could it be? And how does it relate to the Crucible or the mutation of Misbegotten? I'll try to analyze and clarify this further in the next segment of the video. If you find it interesting, please subscribe, like, or share it with your friends. Or, if possible, I hope you will leave generous comments below, and we can discuss your thoughts and hypotheses together. Thank you sincerely for your support. At this point, it's hard not to believe that the Crucible or Elden Ring exists in some form of pure physical substance, and if it does, it could only be some form of tree resin or amber, or both. So, I'll delve deeper into these two entities, one being the liquid form, namely tree resin, and the other being the solid form of tree resin, which is amber, in the original game. Firstly, I'm sure that in your item inventory, you'll have at least one item called root resin. This item's description reads as follows: resin secreted from the roots of the great tree, can also be found near trees on the surface. Material used in crafting items. The roots of the great tree were once linked to those of the Erdtree, or so they say, and it is for this reason catacombs are built around great tree roots. From these lines, we know that the great tree in the game does indeed secrete resin, which is used to craft items to enhance weapons' power. Importantly, the roots of the great tree were once linked to the Erdtree. Here, I understand that the great trees are the offspring, or minor Erdtrees, that we encounter in the game, with Erdtree being their mother. So, did Erdtree also secrete tree resin like the minor Erdtrees? The obvious answer is yes, as evidenced by many items in the game, such as the Blessed Dew Talisman or the Icon Shield. The Blessed Dew Talisman's description reads, talisman depicting a drop of the Erdtree's sap, a blessed boon. Gradually restores HP. It was once thought that the blessed sap of the Erdtree would drip from its boughs forever, but that age of plenty swiftly came to a close, and with time, the Erdtree became more an object of faith. Therefore, it's clear that the Erdtree also once secreted resin, and if you pay attention, the red and gold color of this resin is quite similar to the color of the liquid in the small vial I mentioned earlier and also similar to the color of the root resin item, with the only difference being that the red hue of the root resin item is more prominent than the gold hue. Not stopping there, if you look closely at the bottom of this talisman, you'll notice another important pattern, which is the crucible symbol that I've mentioned extensively in previous videos. Another very important item that I can't ignore is the blessing of the Erdtree. Here, I'm not interested in its description, what I'm most interested in is its symbol. This is the symbol of the crucible. So why is an item with a very clear name like Erdtree illustrated with the symbol of the crucible? The explanation for this is very simple. In fact, the crucible tree is also the ancient Erdtree, a time before the Erdtree we know today became an object of faith. What about the tree in the DLC that we've seen? Is it the crucible tree? Personally, I believe it is indeed the crucible tree and also the ancient Erdtree. So, what about the Erdtree we see in the original game? It's likely a different species from the crucible tree, and after receiving power from the Elden Ring or being nurtured by the crucible tree resin, it developed superiorly and grew to the colossal size we witnessed. Subsequently, it was burned in the unsung battle event and then adorned with golden light, becoming the object of worship. In summary, the crucible tree and Erdtree share the same origin but are different species. They can be collectively referred to as the Erdtree, but for distinction, I'll call the tree in the DLC trailer the crucible tree and the tree in the original game the Erdtree. Remember, Erdtree resin has the ability to bring life, regeneration, vitality restoration, etc., as evidenced by numerous item descriptions in the game, and including biological growth promotion. In the cut content, there's an image of a leaf, and though I don't know its species, the important point is that it's soaked in a red-yellow substance, resembling the tree resin described in root resin items. Therefore, I believe the resin on this leaf and root resin both belong to the minor Erdtree. Additionally, the resin of the crucible tree and Erdtree would be a red-yellow color, as seen in the trailer and various item images provided. Of course, this includes the small vial in the cut content, a key item that may be given to us by a Misbegotten in some side quest. I hope to see this vial in the game after the DLC is released. However, everything about the resin of the crucible tree probably doesn't stop there. It would be remiss if I didn't tell you that, besides the resin flowing from the giant tree, the crucible tree resin also appears in several other important scenes in the trailer. First is the scene where our advertisement friend is riding Torrent across a swamp that many believe to be the poison swamp, a specialty of From Software that we experienced in the original game. However, I believe this is not the poison swamp, but just a regular swamp, or if it is toxic, it may cause a different effect than the poison we're familiar with. You can compare the clear water splashing up as Torrent races through the swamp in the trailer with the toxic water splashing up at the poison swamp in Liurnia. I can assure you they are completely different. So, what makes people think that the swamp our advertisement friend is crossing in the trailer is the poison swamp? The answer lies in its color. If you look closely, you'll see streaks of red-yellow color seeping beneath the swamp's ground, creating a scene that might deceive us into thinking From Software is tricking us into believing it's a poison swamp. So, will we experience the poison SW again in the DLC? It's very likely, as if I remember correctly, Mr. Miyazaki himself confirmed this. Returning to this scene from the trailer, you can see a part of the crucible tree resin flowing down into the ground, seeping out like a network, likely causing the surrounding lands of the crucible tree to all bear such red-yellow hues. In another scene, when our advertisement friend is attacking the summoner mages, which I believe is very close to the swamp I mentioned and likely right under the base of the crucible tree. If you pay close attention, you can also see in the far distance at the upper right corner of the frame another part of the red-yellow crucible tree resin flowing down. In summary, I believe that in the Land of Shadow, many mutated creatures similar to the Misbegotten will appear, for the simple reason that they have come into contact with the crucible tree resin. In another key art provided by From Software, we can also see a character holding a staff, and I'm not entirely sure if this character is a monster or an NPC. He stands on a marsh very similar to the location our advertisement friend passed through, with his head looking very much like a golden berry, but in reality, his head and back are covered in many yellow amber-like substances, a type of amber that is likely of the same origin as the Crucible tree resin. Whether he is an NPC or a monster, I have no idea, but I believe he could also be a product of mutation caused by the Crucible. Looking at his thin, elongated body and long arms, it immediately reminded me of the giant leech tormenting our advertisement friend in another scene of the trailer due to the remarkable similarity in their body structures. It's very possible that after coming into contact with the Crucible tree resin, these leeches evolved to become smarter and took on the appearance of an old man like what we're seeing. Furthermore, in the scene where our advertisement friend is crossing the marsh, you can see the silhouette of tiny creatures that all have an amber on their head similar to the old man's. In conclusion, I believe that the resin and amber of the Crucible tree are likely to cause bodily mutations as well as provide vigorous life force to various life forms, including both souls and bodies because, as we know from the original game, most types of amber, despite their varying colors, share a common trait: a primordial life energy resides inside. So, the direct contact of Misbegotten with the Crucible is certainly feasible, and specifically, they may have actually ingested or come into contact with the resin of the Crucible tree, a resin that can solidify into yellow amber, as we know through the unnamed small vial belonging to the cut content of the game. And naturally, the resin of the Crucible tree is fully capable of causing mutations in their bodies to manifest aspects of the Crucible, such as wings, horns, tails, or feathers. This could apply not only to Misbegotten but also to many other creatures we saw in the DLC trailer, such as messmer snake, horned bears, horned lions, and so on. Indeed, the cut content of the original game is closely related to tree resin and amber alongside the contents of Saint Trina or even the profession feature in the game, so I firmly believe that some of them will return in the upcoming DLC. Speaking of tree resin and amber, what about Haligtree? Does it have resin and amber? The answer is, of course, yes, and you can verify this yourself in the original game. As we know, theoretically, amber is the solidified resin of a tree, and therefore, it inherently possesses the properties of tree resin, such as the ability to provide life, regeneration, and so on. In the original game, when leaving Queen Rennala, Radagon gave her a giant amber containing the embryonic forms of children. Moreover, this giant amber was also a great rune, specifically the Great Rune of the Unborn. Furthermore, the seeds used by Miquella to create the Haligtree could very well be some form of amber. In the original game, we often find a very useful item called the golden seed, which is usually found beneath the illusory trees. The item description reads, "A golden seed, found at the base of an illusory tree, increases a sacred flask's number of uses." When the Elden Ring was shattered, these seeds flew from the Erdtree, scattering across the various lands, as if life itself knew that its end has come. From these notes, we can believe that when Queen Marika shattered the Elden Ring with her hammer, its remnants dispersed and transformed into these golden seeds, which then sprouted into illusory trees. If you revisit the Elden Ring announcement trailer from a few years ago, where Queen Marika shatters the Elden Ring, you'll surely recognize that the Elden Ring itself seems to be some form of amber that may have belonged to the roots of the Crucible tree at some point in the past. But the important thing is that we know the golden seed item is likely a form of transformed amber. Returning to the Haligtree, I personally strongly believe that this tree is also created from some form of amber seed, but instead of being yellow like the Erdtrees, its amber is green. In the cut content of the game, there's a particularly interesting tool item that caught my attention, which is this green amber necklace. Although it doesn't have a name, looking at its design, it's hard for anyone to doubt that it doesn't describe the Haligtree. Indeed, the overall design of this necklace is the symbol of the Haligtree that you may be familiar with. Moreover, if you pay attention, on the symbol of the Haligtree, specifically at its root, there's a very familiar pattern resembling the seed of the Erdtree. Yes, you heard it right, its pattern is exactly like the Crimson Seed Talisman, an item designed based on the shape of the Erdtree seed. Not only that, but in the area of the Haligtree, you can also find many similar patterns. Therefore, the seed of the Haligtree is likely directly related to the seed of the Erdtree, which I believe Miquella used to create the Haligtree at Elfil Fortress in the North Sea, and by irrigating it with her blood to nurture it. What's even more special is that the necklace I just mentioned has 3 green amber stones stained with blood at the bottom position, symbolizing the seeds of the tree. For those who don't know, the resin and amber of the Haligtree are green-yellow, and you can clearly see the resin parts coming from the Haligtree, and of course, they have a green-yellow color. Furthermore, the item Miquella Knight's sword has the following note: sword forged by servants of Miquella of the Haligtree, with a design modeled after those carried by Carian knights. Instead of glintstone, however, amber from the Haligtree is embedded in the blade. A sumptuous piece, yet it has never been offered to any knight, an ill-starred sword with no master. From these notes, we can be sure that the amber of the Haligtree has a green-yellow color. Perhaps, after undergoing the process of using her blood as a nutrient, the seed of the Erdtree transformed to become the Haligtree with resin and amber in green-yellow color, as we know. In conclusion, we can believe that Miquella's blood also has the same nature and capabilities as the resin of the Crucible tree or the Erdtree when it can provide nutrition, life, and stimulate biological growth, resulting in the creation of a giant Haligtree. At this point, I strongly believe that the sapling we saw in another key art provided by From Software is the embodiment of Miquella, representing the hidden image of Miquella in the Land of Shadow. However, I believe that the sapling is unlikely to appear in the upcoming DLC, or if it does, it's more probable to appear towards the end of the DLC storyline. This is simply because it's just a key art from Software, and there's no certainty that the elements depicted in key art will be featured in the game. They primarily serve as visual cues to prompt us to seek answers to the questions posed by the game's theories. Returning to the Shadow of the Erdtree trailer, it seems that the resin of the Crucible tree or amber is not only used as a catalyst for mutation, providing life energy to living forms, and promoting biological development, but it is also applied to create very distinctive weapons. For example, a sword or possibly a spear made of amber piercing through the head of the old man we saw in a painting, standing beside Queen Marika with dark hair who appears in the trailer. I personally believe that this old man is a relative of Marika, and both of them came from elsewhere to the Land of Shadow because both figures in the painting appear to be wearing attire reminiscent of travelers. On his clothing and the frame of the painting, there is the same symbol that I am confident does not resemble any item that has appeared in the original game or in the trailer again. I'm not sure if it's a cloud, fire, water, or air pattern, but it closely resembles the description of a butterfly hiding in smoke or the image of a butterfly formed from smoke. I'm also not sure if this old man is related to the purple incantations that create butterfly creatures shown by the advertisement friend in the trailer. But I understand that this symbol's pattern is entirely unrelated to the original game, and furthermore, this golden symbol can only appear on the clothing of nobles, so this old man is likely wealthy. He might be a merchant from elsewhere who came to the lands between, and it's worth noting that only the wealthy can afford to own a portrait of themselves. It should also be noted that the Land of Shadow was once a bustling trading and cultural center in the lands between, as you can see in my Part 1 video, where I explain why I believe so. I'll leave the link below in the video description. In the trailer and the key art provided by From Software, we can also see advertisement friend emitting trails of smoke from his body, which I believe to be various perfumes. So why do the promotional images from Software show traces of perfumes not just once, but multiple times? Personally, I believe that the Land of Shadow was a place for buying and selling spices and crafting renowned perfumes, and the man in the painting is likely a spice merchant or a perfume maker. Returning to our main topic, firstly, I believe that he is one of the Erdtree faithful mentioned by the NPC in the trailer, which is why he is punished by Messmer and the Omen worshippers, or the Crucible. It's very likely that he helped Marika carry out a task that goes against the religious beliefs of the Land of Shadow or the beliefs of Messmer. The amber weapon piercing into his body indeed resembles the symbol on the small shield used by Messmer's knights, and it's also similar to the candlestick that the Omen hat-wearing friend uses to blow fire into our player character's face. Therefore, there's no doubt that he was punished by Messmer and the Omen worshippers or the Crucible. In terms of design, the amber weapon piercing into his body also closely resembles the roots or the spine of the Elden Beast, a darn Pokemon that stole nearly 4 hours of my life. So what about the candlestick used by the Omen hat-wearing friend? Of course, it's also made of amber, just like the weapon that was piercing into the old man's body that I just mentioned. Moreover, if you look closely, this candlestick seems to have no candles on it but can still maintain the flame. The only explanation for this is that resin and amber are indeed materials that can sustain fire without the need for candles. In conclusion, resin and amber in the game are truly versatile materials with many important applications, from daily life to weapon production, from the ability to induce biological mutations to providing primal life energy, and even for religious purposes. All these factors directly explain why the castle beneath the Crucible tree seems to still be diligently harvesting resin from it. The video has been quite long now, so if you found this video interesting or it provided some additional insights for you, please subscribe, like, or share it with your friends and loved ones to watch. Or if possible, please leave generous comments below or provide feedback, questions, or theories that the game brings to us, and we will discuss them together. Sincerely thank you for your support, and see you again in the next videos.